morning, good morning, good morning. We're glad to have you today. Welcome to a special edition of Black Thought on this, the Martin Luther King Jr. Day holiday. We're glad to have you with us. First of all, if you want to keep up with what we're doing on this show and also keep up with other things, we want to invite you to go to noelhutchinson.com, NOELHUTCHINSON.com. Yes, I know it's a long name, but if you go there and check out what we're doing, you can see all the things that we do, from the church to the show to the blog, also to the book. And also there are links to what we're doing in all of those areas, so you can check it out. We also have a YouTube channel for the show, which is MUTV1 Black Thought, MUTV1 Black Thought, where you can watch previous segments of what we've done here at Black Thought. Matter of fact, I want to encourage you to go there and check out the YouTube channel, the interview that we had with somebody that was actually at Bloody Sunday in March on that fateful day. We have that YouTube interview up right now, so you can go check it out. But of course, don't go there right now. Stay right here and be with us. We have a wonderful and impactful show lined up for you. We're glad that you're here. As you can see, I have some marvelous guests with me. And so to my left and your right, we have Mr. Jett Lucas. And then to my right and your left, we have Miss Carlisa Shaw, Esquire, and then we have Mr. Richard Thompson from Mediaverse, Memphis. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in their own way, starting with Mr. Lucas, and then we'll go around the table and then we'll get started. Mr. Lucas, ball's in your court.
Good morning, Brother Jett Lucas. I partner with WRUG Media Group. Studied philosophy and history at the University of Memphis, and real estate agent, and just concerned citizen.
So you do it all. So in your other life, you're Jamaican. You have about 9 jobs. I hear you.
15 things, man.
All right. All right, let's go to Miss Carlisa Shaw.
I'm Carlisa Shaw. I'm an attorney by trade. By passion, I'm an activist. I do quite a few things in the Memphis community. Largely, my most impactful thing that I enjoy doing is I lead the outreach ministry for Mississippi Boulevard Christian Church, and through that we have the ability to change lives, and that's basically what it is about me.
All right, wonderful. Go right ahead, sir.
I'm Richard Thompson. I'm the founder and lead writer of Mediaverse Memphis. We cover local media. We've been doing that since 2006, 2007. I'm also the president of the Memphis Association of Black Journalists.
All right. It is an honor to have all of you with us today. We're blessed by your presence here on this show. And as you know, our focus today is, where are we in 2015? I know on a day like this, we like to talk about Dr. King. We like to make the focus on where are we with the dream, et cetera, et cetera. But now, I want to kind of flip it in the other direction. Let's start from today and then let the past kind of do some influence on today. What has been going on in the last year, and how should we interpret those events? Because we realize if Dr. King had lived, he wouldn't be stagnant. He wouldn't be stuck in 1964. He wouldn't be stuck in 1965, but he would have moved forward. Matter of fact, when he died, his focus was getting ready to shape around economic justice, and he was also addressing the war in Vietnam. So with that in mind, let's start first of all nationally. You know, there's been a lot going on in the last year. We've had the Mike Brown case in Ferguson. We've had Eric Garner take place. We had Tamir Rice. And then the year before that, we had Trayvon Martin. And it seems that, especially out of what happened with Eric Garner, because unlike the others, we had some evidence. We had a video. We were able to see for ourselves what happened on that fateful day. And that has generated an I Can't Breathe movement, protests all over the country. Matter of fact, I must admit, I was involved in many of the protests right here in Memphis. So it seems like out of that, there's been a grassroots movement that has burgeoned, And I want to kind of get your take on it. Are we really developing a movement, or is it a case of we rile up for the latest occurrence and then maybe 5 weeks later we go back to being complacent? Give me your take on it, and I'll just let you jump in.
Well, I think this time it does seem to be a little bit different. Seems like we may be developing a movement, but with mediums like this and you guys, we have to actually come together to sustain the movement, because we have momentum now, and people are generally concerned. People are watching. We just need to support really black media. That's what it all comes back to, I think. That's what it comes back to, because the images out there. What I noticed in the Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, and all of that, the saddest part of all those stories to me was Tamir Rice's story, because it told the general story to me. When that cop shot that kid, he radioed in a call that said, male suspect down, about 20 years old. That's how that kid looked to that cop. You know what I'm saying? For whatever reason. And that came from media.
And we had the video evidence of that as well.
Yeah.
I need to add that.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, we do. And that came from media. General media telling our story. That's where those images come from. And that's just where we are with that, in my opinion.
And then added to that was the fact that when some of his family got there, they weren't really dealt with in a humane way. And if I remember correctly, the mother didn't even find out about it from the police. She found out about it kind of around the way in the neighborhood sort of thing. So, you know, you look at that, you look at what happened even when Mike Brown was shot, same thing. Mm-hmm. And I can't speak for the rest of you around the table, but I know I've been at countless killings where when you get to the site, the body's laying there in the street. May be covered up, may not be covered up. In our neighborhood, and the humanity of how we're treated, a lot of times is not evident. I just have to be candid with that. What is your take on some of this? Are we developing a movement? What do you see?
Well, how do you define movement?
Well, let's, to help us, go back to the time of the civil rights movement in the 60s. And now let's juxtapose that against what we see right now. Are we at the cusp of developing something that will be at least as impactful, at least, or in that direction, as what we did maybe 30, 40 years ago?
Well, here's my point. One of the reasons why I asked that is because I think it's important for us to define what is a movement. In my mind, the civil rights movement has never ended and is still ongoing. And so I think that when we see Michael Brown, when we see Eric Garner, when we see Tamir Rice and things like this, it's just an outgrowth, this continuation. It highlights this the systematic issues that we have to deal with as part of the civil rights movement to make sure that the police officers don't automatically assume that our children are adults, that they don't overreact, that there is cultural sensitivity training. That's part of the civil rights movement, you know, in my opinion. I don't think so. I don't think that we're starting a new movement. I think it's merely a continuation of repulsing of the current.
That's an interesting point. Ms. Shaw, you have any input on this?
Of course I do. I think this is such a loaded question. I believe that we have to define not only what the term movement is, but specifically what this movement looks like. And I believe that there are a lot of systematic issues when it comes to criminal justice and the criminal justice system. If we're specifically focused on law enforcement, it's what I do the majority of my day, and so I see it. But we can't limit the conversation to law enforcement, because especially when we're talking about the Black Lives Matter, we refer to that as a movement, Black Lives Matter movement. If Black Lives Matter, does it only matter when a white police officer kills you? Or do Black Lives Matter in North Memphis, and the fact that we have tens of dozens of kids killed in our city on every passing weekend? And so we have to start looking at what this movement is and then what we want out of it. One thing that I am very critical about this this look into law enforcement is we haven't pulled together our best and brightest legal minds to come together and say, this is what we want. Because we can protest, we can march, we can scream to the top of the hills, but if there is no legislation passed, if there are no city ordinance passed, if there are no police department changes made, if there are nothing substantive done, then we are just yelling. So we have to pull together those people who can help us understand what the laws are, why is this currently okay, and what can be done to change it. And until we do that and collectively say, this is what we want done, instead of saying this doesn't feel right, then we can't put up any traction. We can't decide that this is going to go anywhere.
Okay, well, two things. Both of you raised some interesting, let me say it this way, conundrums that we need to address. The first one is, I agree with you in principle, Brother Thompson, when you say that the movement has not ended. But one point in that, has there been a lull in the movement? Because was there a segment of time in which we either dropped the ball or put it down without pushing the movement forward? That's one thing. Then the second piece to that is, we have traditional organizations that have run with this ball. And in what's happening now, it seems like they're playing catch up to something that has developed from the grassroots. So how does what existed before coalesce and combine with what exists now? Now let me tag the other piece that you raised and put them all together, and then we can kind of have dialogue about it. The other side of it is this. I think because we don't have enough media outlets and that tell our story the way we want, and we don't have enough dialogue on this part, we don't hear, for example, some of the grassroots things that are happening in Ferguson and other places in terms of the legal perspective of this. We don't see the kaleidoscope effect of what's happening. All we see are the protests. For example, I'm trying to remember the name of the media outlet, it escapes me, blame it on age, but the people that help to galvanize things in Ferguson, they're on Twitter, they're on Instagram, they're on emails, and I get their emails now, sharing some of the nuts and bolts of what they're doing, and included in that is legislation. But unless you're tied in certain ways, you don't hear that narrative. You just hear that people are protesting in the street, and it doesn't connect. So I want to raise, I guess, the question or the issue that you've raised. In light of what I just said, how do you see this fit? Because we're not getting all of the information. We don't know all of what's happening around us. You make some valid points which tie us back to the movement that hasn't ended, in that the civil rights movement is not just protest, but the civil rights movement is also litigation. The civil rights movement is not only somebody that was in the streets protesting, but somebody had to wait back at the house with bail money. So it had this broader bouquet that we don't often paint when we have this conversation. I see this at the tip of your tongue. Go right ahead.
Well, when you look at the civil rights movement, one of the reasons how we can categorize or define the civil rights movement is by its legislative successes, or its ability to make law. You know, the civil rights, the Voting Rights Act, the Civil Rights Acts that passed. I tend to think that we won't really fully realize the benefits of what's happened in the past year until we can take steps to make sure that the laws that impact the ability of how you formulate a grand jury, for instance, are changed in the state of Missouri or elsewhere. You know, that's when you find the real tangible results of those actions. Now, those actions started the discussion. Now we entered a phase where, okay, what are the things that we have in place to take that forward, to make sure that we can go to the State House and say, look, these are the steps that we need to take to make sure the grand juries, you know, can't be contrived in such a manner to produce an outcome that, on the face of the evidence, doesn't make sense.
All right, go right ahead.
One thing that I believe that people of color miss is that the civil rights movement pre-1965 has been the biggest successful social change engine that this world has ever seen. And oftentimes as youth, and I speak for us generally, millennials, we think that with social media that we can change the world and that we can change the outlook of how things work, and that because we are introduced to technology that we know more than anybody else. And with youth becomes some form of invincibility. And we have to start understanding that you have to look at what works and what has worked in the past. And if you want to be successful, you start there. I don't believe in reinventing wheels. If the wheel has already been spinning, I'm not going to start with a stone. And so I think that that's the kind of the missing piece, is that we have a perfect model of what was going well. I do believe that there was some dip-offs, and we didn't do a really good job of transitioning leadership. And but we have to go back to when things were going well for this movement, what was happening, and see if we can use social media, use technology. I mean, we don't really need large-scale media outlets. I get on Facebook every day, and I really get most of my information from Twitter. I check Twitter every single morning. I don't watch the news. I pick up Commercial Appeal and may read it online, but for the most part, social media is how people get information. And so we're asking and begging for, why isn't CBS playing this, and why isn't Fox News covering this? Well, it's not even really necessary anymore, because we have camera phones, we have Twitter, we have social media. And so it's really about changing the conversation and figuring out what fits. And so like you said, there are people in Ferguson that are coming together and doing these things. Well, police brutality and the overuse of force isn't a Ferguson issue.
It's a national.
It's a national issue. And so we're only talking about what this looks like in Ferguson. We're missing it. If Black Lives Matter, then we have to stop focusing on these three names, because we're losing black kids every single day to a number of things. And so we have to start figuring out how we can save black lives generally, because I don't want to save 3 and miss 5,000.
I agree with you. Go right ahead, sir.
I think I agree with him.
I appreciate the idea and the heart and the inspiration behind the hashtag like Black Lives Matter. You know, but the reality is that it's important for us to focus on situations where parts of the government, and law enforcement are part of the government, where they act in a certain manner. Is quite different when a police officer acts in one way and a regular citizen acts in another way. People get upset. Most of the crime, most of the homicides that happen in Memphis are because of arguments. You know, people who know one another, they respond. But that's different than if a police officer, someone who is trained to respond in a certain situation, looks at a person and automatically deems them a suspect or whatever, and acts with excessive force. So I think that we can't necessarily say that in all situations, you know, we should approach it from a political aspect, because, you know, there's no real politics. When I'm angry, I'm angry. There's no politics in that.
Yeah.
So I think, but back to my point is that I think that when you have something like Black Lives Matter, it has to be focused on the fact that we're asking the government, you know, the people whose salaries we pay, to treat us and to come to our community and treat us in a manner that's reflective.
Exactly. Go right ahead.
And to piggyback on what he was saying, and not only people who are trained to do a job and take care of situations, not only that, they're paid by us to do this. Ray or whoever on the street did not ever promise me that he would protect my life or he would serve me in any beneficial way.
True.
You know what I'm saying? He never, in fact, he is there to do quite the opposite, you know, and the same institution that comes from, to me, is the same one where the police get the audacity and the authority to think that they can come in and kill me without repercussion. That's where that comes from as well. It's the same issue, but you have to start at the accountable end. You have to, and not only that, the work is being done on the end in the street.
Yeah.
It's just I take offense to when people say, "Why don't we march when Hadiel Pennington was killed during whatever that was in Chicago? Why didn't we march then?" Well, actually, they did march on that one, but that's because it was a high-profile thing. But if we were to march based on every murder that happened between two people argument, what does that look like? What does that look like? And also, the work is being done. You're doing the work. You're doing the work. The work on that end is preventative. Once the crime has committed, it's time for the law.
Yeah.
And see, the law tends to have a problem when the law commits that same crime. They villainize the victim. They tend to want to shame the victim, and then there are no charges. But when Ray kills Pookie, that's Barack's cousin or somebody likes to talk about a lot. but when that happens and the cops know who did it, the cops tend to do their job.
This is true.
So this marching and this reaction is about justice, not necessarily about crime. Those are two different issues.
I definitely agree that there are multiple issues, but I often challenge people of color. We have to learn how to walk and chew bubble gum at the same time, which means that we have to understand that we could talk about more than one issue at a time and encompass them and intelligently attack them from more than one force. And it's possible. I promise you can walk, chew bubble gum, and probably tie your shoe. I mean, there are things that can be working, and different people have different passions and different callings. And so I believe that when we talk about the criminal justice system, if that's what we're looking at, police being just a branch of that, we still are missing thousands of kids. I'm very bold by saying that there are more lives that are lost at 201 Poplar, which for people who are not from Memphis is our Shelby County Criminal Complex, which is our jail and our courthouse. There are more black lives lost there than anywhere else on any single day. There are more black lives lost there, and I see it so often. You have people who put kids in very bad situations to take a felony over a misdemeanor. You have kids who are being overcharged by prosecutors. You have judges who don't really understand these kids' backgrounds. You have, 2 African-American criminal court judges in Memphis? And you have, I mean, when I go down there every day, it breaks my heart. You see thousands and thousands of black kids. And so you don't have people who know our stories. You don't have people who know our struggles. And so they oftentimes, I warn my clients, if you have a bachelor's degree from Christian Brothers and you dress a certain way, you are put in the same category as Pookie them who done shot 4 people, because when you're not from a community and you haven't done the work to be a part of a community, you tend to stereotype everybody together. And so we're missing lives. There are more lives that the criminal justice system is touching and affecting and ruining. I try to explain to my clients all the time, do you understand, you pleading guilty to this felony, do you know what you're doing to yourself? And most of them have no earthly idea. You're 19 years old and you just want to get out of jail. Your mama can't make your $5,000 bond. You've been sitting here for 3 months.
Especially
and so,
young women.
If you're going to time serve me on the felony, I'm just trying to go home. And I'm like, dude, just give me 2 more months. I know you hate sitting here. I know you hate being here, but I can work this out. It just takes time. They be like, nah, I got to go home, Miss Carlisa. And I get it. You want to go home, but I'm like,
they mess up the rest of their lives.
You can't do nothing. You got to mark that box forever, and you're put in a situation that you really, I mean, you're not dead, but you're no longer a citizen. You're surely not those. You lose your citizenship, right?
And part of that is the fact that our public defender's office is underfunded.
Yeah.
A lot of the people who enter our criminal justice system don't have a way to fund their own defense. To speak to, I mean, she's very eloquently stating what's going on, and so we have to develop, if we as a community, we need to say to our to people who control the purse strings, we want you to adequately fund these mechanisms that help our people. We need good public defenders who aren't buried under caseload to be able to sit down with our juvenile offenders and say, look, this is what's happening. Let me explain to you what's going on in our criminal justice system. And that's not happening, and that's one of the reasons why the feds came down and busted our juvenile court system, a few years ago.
Exactly. Now, let me do this. We're going to close this segment in a moment. I want to put a pin in what you so eloquently raised, because we're going to get to a segment of this show where we deal with Memphis. And when we start dealing with Memphis, there's some tangible discussions that we need to have about our city and how it ought to look, especially as we're in 2015 and we're going into a mayoral race and we're going into city council races. So I want to put a pin there. But now, I will say this. When I start to say I agree with you in terms of not focusing on the three, but focusing on many, here's what I meant, and the two of you kind of hit on it. For me, I may be the oldest person here, and I'm glad that we're having this intergenerational dialogue. For me, especially as a native New Yorker, when I see what happened to Eric Garner, for me it's the same old song. I feel like the Four Tops cleared their throat and started singing it's the same old song. Because I've been seeing this all my life, from Eleanor Bumpers, whose hand was blown off by the police, to countless others. This song's been going on. And my question is, when does it stop? And New York Times had an article where they showed that 10% of the officers are the ones that are creating this whole issue with police brutality. Matter of fact, the officer that choked Eric Garner had about 3 or 4 issues come up about him in the last year before he choked the man. So the majority of police are law-abiding. They serve the public trust. And where would we be without them? But the fact remains that we have a society, and you mentioned it in what you said, Ms. Shaw, that paints the picture of us as subhuman, as not worthy of being addressed in a proper way. And when that happens, the perception of us, whether we have a PhD or no D, is that we're automatically guilty. So that needs to be fixed as much as some of these other systemic things, just how we're perceived and how we're treated. Because after all, I think you mentioned it, we pay taxes, we support these governmental entities, and then to get abused by the very things we support is unacceptable. So we have to look at this. But then the other thing, let me bring this up. In terms of the movement, and I'm going to use this local example, someone that we know well, and I just won't raise her name because I didn't get permission. I was in a public forum where she said that we had the whole protest around Trayvon Martin, and we had the focus down at the Civil Rights Museum. It got media attention. It was put together. It wasn't put together by some of the usual suspects, I'll say it that way. It was put together by 2 young ladies who happened to be on a conference call with the National Action Network. And when the question was raised, who will do this in Memphis, Charlize Clark and Elizabeth Hart raised their hand. Now here's the issue. When they started working, the question was, who are they? Where'd they come from? Why do they have the audacity to step up in this? And the thing is, you have the quote-unquote organizations that ought to be at the front of the march that sometimes don't clear their throat, or they catch up to what the grassroots is doing. So I guess what I'm saying is there's a disconnect, to make some of your points. And talk to me about that. How do you see the disconnect? Am I over-dramatizing the disconnect? And how do we, I guess, fix it before we leave this segment? Because this is important, because I think you've already stated that we can't really have a movement until we're together, and we can't really have a movement until we start checking off some of these boxes. And the main one is the legislative box that shows us how far we've moved in our progress. So let me start with you, Brother Jett. Talk to us about that.
Well, I think we have to start, and this may not come, this won't be a solution, but you have to start. You can't get finished unless you get started with a thing. You have to start using the words, the keywords, the talking points that we like to use. You have to start using those and then apply them to yourself. You have to start creating solutions that don't necessarily benefit you personally. And if you're willing to do that, then you can create working parts. You saw it, I created a whole plan for dealing with our youth in the city and things like that. And the way I came up with that plan was based on my thinking on that. This can only work if I eliminate myself and create working parts where only the working parts benefit. And I created that plan. Now, whether the plan ever gets looked at you, whether it's possible or not, I think that's the anchor from which we have to begin to work.
And let me flip that a different way. Dr. King took the money that he received from the Nobel Peace Prize, which was formidable, which could have changed the economic landscape of his family. And he took that money and put it in the movement.
Yeah.
To make your point.
That's what you got. You got to be able to sacrifice, and if you can't, that's why we are where we are with black leadership, black legislators, black. When people always say that, and in a lot of instances, we are worse off than Ferguson, because the high percentage of African Americans in Ferguson, and then with the mostly all white leadership and only 3 black officers on the police department, that's one thing. But to have black leadership and still have the same projection is quite another thing.
Right.
You see what I'm saying?
Put a pin in that, because we're going to get to that. We're going to get to that. So don't go down that street yet. When we get out of this segment, we're going to definitely get to that. Your input.
That's a good street to go down.
It is.
Boy, that's a street to go down.
All right. Any input from you all? Jump right in.
I think a part of your question was there are people who weren't easily identifiable in our community that decided to take up this movement. And one big problem that I don't think is a black problem, this is an American problem, is that we love celebrities. As American people, we love celebrities, and if there is a celebrity selling us something or telling us to do something, then we typically like to follow it. And it's just, it's one of those really sad things to say, okay, how can we transition the whole culture? Because it's really not just us, because our pigmentless friends do the same thing, so we have to transition the entire culture to say, you don't have to know what they do for a living. You don't have to know who their people is. You don't have to know what church they go to. You don't have to know nothing about them. We all have to come together to say, I have a problem with this, so whatever you need me to do, and it's okay for me not to be the face of this. And that, I think that is the problem, especially when it comes to this movement. We're all looking for a face. Everybody wants to know who the face of this movement is, and a lot of us, especially us younger people, please, Al, don't be the face of this movement. We don't want you to be the face of this movement. We don't want you to be the face of any more movements. We appreciate the legacy. And so we're looking for somebody to lead us. We're looking for, I hear black folks say all the time, we need a Moses. We need somebody that's going to take us to the promised land.
See, that's part of the problem for the Lord. Because we've been waiting on Moses, and the Lord hadn't sent Moses. Because the Lord trying to tell all of us to be our own individual Moses and stop waiting on Moses or Moetta, you want to do the female version. Stop waiting for them to show up.
But we, as a people, we wait. And so we have to get to the point that we're tired of waiting. And we're tired of waiting for one specific person to lead us to the promised land and say, this movement isn't about one person, it's about all of us. And so all of us can do something to be a part of it.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Well, I don't think that people are waiting. I think that there are a lot of people in the community who do a lot of different things. Many hands make light work, There are a lot of people who do a lot of smaller things, and eventually what they do, make bigger jumps. But I think that, the civil rights movement wasn't started by people who were known. The civil rights movement, people who took over, lunch counters. These people weren't they weren't celebrities. They were regular college students. They were regular people. And so movements are started by regular people. So I think that, one of the things that people like to do, or they like to say, well, because if it's not the NAACP that's doing something, or if it's not Al Sharpton, or if it's not Jesse Jackson, if these people aren't speaking out on our behalf, well, they're good talking heads. They're people who the national media likes to focus on, but you do have a lot of people like here locally, like Tammy Sawyer, who
Exactly.
who started doing the die-ins in the city. Regular person, you know, figured I want to do something, and she made it happen, and people follow suit. So I think that kind of stuff happens all the time.
Indeed.